My father retired as a detective sergeant from the Fort Wayne, Indiana Police Department. He was a proud man. He was proud to be a police officer. And he was also a very proud black man. And so I grew up with a very particular understanding of police power and the power of racism. He, one time I told him about the first time I got pulled over. I just started giving the story as it came, and and I said, when I reached over to grab my registration, and he's like, wait, you did what? Don't ever do that again. And the reason is I had started to reach for the registration before the police officer came to the car. And if a police officer doesn't see sees you go down for the back of your head and he doesn't know what's going on, he might escalate the situation. The story is relatively simple. I was driving home from my father's neighborhood, predominantly black neighborhood in Fort Wayne. It's about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. It's 1995. I've got my hat to the back. I'm driving a 1980 Chevy Impala. It's, big puke green car. And I'm just driving down this four-lane road. The only other car is the police officer coming towards me. And I'm not speeding or anything, so I'm not thinking too much of it. I happen to look in my rearview mirror after we pass, and he pulled a Yui. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And so, silly me being 18 and kind of stupid, as soon as I got out of range, I gunned it. And I tried to go around the corner. And luckily, there was a red light stopping me from my stupidity. And I slowed down by the time he caught up with me, so he never knew that. And as I said, I reached over and grabbed the registration. And because, of course, that's what you're supposed to do. And as he came up to the car, I noticed he had his hand on his gun. And he came up to the window. And he's like, oh, hey, I thought you were a thug or something. And as soon as he saw me, he relaxed. And the rest of the stop went like many of the stops some of you, I'm sure, have had in this room. I had a front headlight out. I didn't know about it. He was jocular. It was a friendly conversation. And I got off with a verbal warning. He's like, just get that headlight fixed so I don't have to give you a $185 ticket. Bye. And that was the end of it. But that was my first encounter with a police officer. And in retrospect, knowing what I know now, it was a pretextual stop. He thought, it just, everything matched up. I was coming out of the wrong neighborhood, driving the wrong kind of car, driving with exhibiting hat to the back, and it's dark, so he couldn't tell what color I was. But as soon as he got to the window, he saw it, and he relaxed. So this is something that I think people really have to internalize. So for many people in this country, they don't have that sort of what people would call white privilege that I got. As soon as he saw me, I was fine. Most people who deal with police officers don't, excuse me. A lot of people who have to deal with police in that situation wouldn't have gotten that de-escalation, and that's a problem. But as our panelists will explain, different treatment by law enforcement is not just a problem for America's black communities. In recent years, American hostility towards immigrants and Muslim communities have affected our criminal laws. These deeply held fears and prejudices have manifested in different policies to discuss these, have manifested in different policies enforced by our police and U.S. Border Patrol. There are legal double standards depending on who you are in this country. Particularly in the black community, you have programs like Stop and Frisk in New York City, where the overwhelming number of people who are stopped and searched are black. The ticketing in Ferguson that I believe Grover mentioned earlier was basically taxation on a black population in a mixed race town. And here in DC, you have the gun recovery units that are essentially SWAT teams that in certain communities that harass residents and ask them if they have weapons. And I wanted to read a section that Judge Janice Rogers Brown of the DC Circuit Court of Appeals wrote about this case, about a case that was brought by the against the gun recovery units. For those not familiar with DC, if you're visiting, Georgetown is a very Tony shopping area inhabited mostly by white people, and these gun recovery units are primarily in Southeast DC, which is heavily African American. She wrote, "As a thought experiment, try to imagine the scene in Georgetown. Would residents of that neighborhood maintain there was no pressure to comply if the district's police officers patrolled Prospect Street in tactical gear, questioning each person they encountered about whether or not they were carrying an illegal firearm? Nothing about the gun recovery unit's modus operandi is designed to convey a message that compliance is not required. While viewing such an encounter as consensual, is roughly equivalent to finding the latest Sasquatch sighting credible, I submit to the prevailing orthodoxy, but I continue to reject its counterintuitive premise." She goes on to say, "With the guise of voluntary consent stripped away, the reality of the district's regime is revealed. It is a rolling roadblock that sweeps citizens up at random and subjects them to undesired police interactions, culminating in a search of their persons and effects. If the Fourth Amendment is intended to offer meaningful protection in the context of Terry stops, the voluntary consent exemption cannot be used to engage with members of the public en masse and at random to fabricate articulable suspicions for virtually every citizen officer's encounter on patrol." And I think if you applied not only the gun recovery units tactics, but the descriptions that Vicky described of border patrols, like here in DC, we are within 100 miles of the coastline, and that just churches, the Christian and Jewish religious houses were being surveyed for scary people, terrorists. I think you would see a considerably different approach that American law enforcement would take. I would say, one of the reasons we have this conference is to get people to understand what's actually going on in communities they may not live in. From a tactical perspective, I would try to get rid of pretextual stops. Is just one aspect. And to do that, you'd probably, as I said in the intro, you're going to have to end the drug war. Because right now, as Cynthia Lum described, using arrest as metric for police, for promotion or for basically just, for police for the satisfaction that the departments have towards their officers, they have to make arrests, and if they have to make arrests, they're going to do it in any way that's possible. And the Supreme Court said you can stop someone because they have a taillight out, or the little light that's above your license plate is burned out. Well, that's a reason I can pull you over, and you just happen to be black, and I'm going to ask you to search your car. And then on top of that, they're trained to get you to give up your right to not be searched. They're going to say, "Well, I'm going to call a dog," or I'll go get a warrant, even though they really can't. What they're doing is trying to get you to give up your rights. And people who understand that, there was a great book called Pulled Over by Charles Epp that from the University of Kansas that talked about the disparities in traffic stops. Now, everyone knows that black people get pulled over more often. However, they broke it down where when it came down to traffic stops, which was for actual open speeding, that whites were actually pulled over more often than the blacks were on net, and percentage was pretty close. But for investigatory stops, these pretextual stops skewed heavily black. And most of the people who were pulled over and asked to be searched and consented to search were completely innocent. And people know that that's going on, and that undermines legitimacy and undermines the effectiveness of police force. So until we change the incentives for police officers to act like that, it's just going to continue.